Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Mathyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Last week we concluded, we carried over some of these modifications of Kshetram and made it personal. We brought it to the person. So naturally, verse 7 will now continue with that personalized approach. What are these further modifications upon which we, by our alignment with them, we can produce a successful life, which is in verse 7. So verse 7 will be about the 20 values. However, before going to verse 7, I would like to firstly finish off some unanswered questions that are remaining in verse 5 specifically. Suppose I get moksha, but other jivas don't get moksha. This implies the ajnanis, that means the non-moksha people, are always there. Isn't this duality of number one, ajnanis, and two, Brahman? How to resolve this contradiction? So what she's saying is, how do you now bring these two together? Because there's the unenlightened people who are still there, and there's Brahmins. So this means like there's two there. And then the lady continues. She says, if desire for moksha is innate, that means all beings will eventually discover it. However, if that happens, then problem arises of last jiva. Okay, so we've got the last man standing, they're by themselves, and everyone's waiting. Come on, man, just get your knowledge right. And the guy's like, no, man, I'm still enjoying my experiences on earth. And the sun's going, oh, okay, I got to keep on shining for just one person left. So we got to address this also. So this is still question 2. From the beginningless creation, the jiva count was finite. And on every moksha of jiva, the counter goes down. Doesn't this mean the counter will reach 0 eventually, thus the end of creation? So this is very much a question that is in alignment with a lady who also posed the previous question. And then the madam continues. She says, elaborated the difference between Ishwara and Brahman. I thought they were the same, just from a different point of view. How does the big crunch happen? So we talked about, from the point of singularity, how the universe appears. So I want to discuss what happens when there's a reversal of that. Is Hiranyagarbha's Sarvajna in potential? Sarvajna means all knowledge. So is Hiranyagarbha's Sarvajna in potential similar to Sarvajna in potential in the causal body? So let's go into the first question. Suppose I get moksha, but other jivas don't get moksha. This implies the ajnanis are always there. Isn't this duality of ajnanis and Brahman? How to resolve this contradiction? There's no such thing as jiva. Just like there's no such thing as pot. When you say pot, what are you referring to when you say pot?
Name and form.
Yeah, you're entirely referring to the clay. We say pot, right? But you're only saying pot because of the existence or the presence of the clay. So it's not like there's pot and clay. It's not like there's two entities there. There's just one clay. So this means that there's no independent existence which this pot enjoys. This pot doesn't have an independent existence. A jiva doesn't have an independent existence because the pot can be negated. Pot is. Clay is. Molecule is. Atom is. So by the time I say pot, right, it is. By the time I go to clay, where's the pot now? It's gone. You can't find a pot anymore. When I get from molecule to atom, where's the molecule now? I can't find it because I'm at the atom. So which one's real? Is the pot real? Is the atom real? Is the molecule real? So this is what we call mithya. It is neither real nor is it unreal, but it's got this in-between existence. Why is it in between? Because it is there while it's there. But if you investigate into it, it's no longer there. Therefore, we call it mithya, dependent existence. So pot is, clay is, molecule is, atom is, etc. is. The name form changes, but the isness remains in and through all names and forms. So you can negate the name and form. You can negate the jiva. Which kosha would you like to talk about? Would you like to take the Annamaya kosha? Body is, right? Bones are, the cells are. So you can just keep on going and negating every level that you're seeing. You want to talk about emotions? Okay, anger is. Okay, now what does anger consist of? A thought of something that happened in the past. Okay, so let's look at that thing in the past. That thing is, right? Now, what does that thing consist of? Well, it consisted of two people coming together. And one said one thing to the other. Okay, what did they say? They said the words. Okay, word is. So no matter what you look at, you negate it immediately by looking further into it. But the isness remains in and through all of it. So the jiva is only real if you look at a jiva as an independent entity enjoying its own independent existence. But if you look further into the jiva, you cannot find such thing as a jiva. What specifically are you referring to when you say jiva? We only give you the 5 kosha model to help us explain, to quantify this person, to help us kind of say, okay, what is this body, emotions, intellect, so on. But if you look deeper into it, you cannot find anything specific. You can't stop to a final thought and say, okay, thought, period. This pot is nothing but the clay. In that same way, the jiva is nothing but Ishwara. And Ishwara is nothing but Brahman. High tide, low tide. Oh, I'm so tall and big and handsome. Oh, I'm so small and nobody sees me. Doesn't matter. You're still a wave in the ocean. The wave enjoys its existence because of the ocean. It's born out of the ocean. It's sustained by the ocean. It goes back into the ocean. It's got nowhere else to go but from the ocean. But the ocean also depends on the water, on the H2O. So when you refer it to a wave or an ocean, what are you actually referring to? H2O. Therefore, there is no such thing as Jiva and Brahman. There's only Brahman. Just like there's only H2O. I'm referring to the wave only because of the water. I'm referring to the ocean only because of the water. So water alone is in and through all names and forms, including the ocean, entire universe, but also distinct forms that we attribute separate names to. This is why in chapter 2, verse 30, Krishna said to Arjuna, remember when Arjuna was grieving, and Krishna said to him, grieve not for these people, because their essence is Atma alone. Owing to your ignorance, you think they are people, therefore you are grieving. But their essential nature is the one content, the one truth. So Arjuna thought he was grieving for jivas because he was giving independent reality to these jivas. But then Krishna says, grieve not for them, because your ignorance of reality hasn't been ascertained yet. Therefore, you think you're grieving for jivas, but you're actually just grieving for what? The one truth in and through everything, appearing as different jivas, as different forms. So that's answer 1.
Can I ask a related question on that? Last week, you mentioned that the whole world exists because of the desires of jivas. If there aren't any jivas, if jivas and Brahman are all one and the same, then whose desire has created this universe?
Whose desire has created this universe?
Brahman itself has a desire?
Or? Because the universe is beginningless and the jivas are also the universe, therefore the jivas having their desires for the world only to their ignorance, then therefore they create desire for the world. So who creates desires? The jivas. And who creates the world? Ishvara, because of the jivas' desires. In other words, I do not know that I am the whole. I think I'm an individual. And for that, what does this mean? I need the world to feed me, to fill me up. So this means Ishvara has to provide the world for me also. It has to provide a field, a kshetram, whereby I can express my desires. Why am I expressing my desires? Because I think I'm an individual who is empty, who needs to fill myself up. And therefore, then the world gets created.
But doesn't this create a sense of duality? Because now we're talking about jivas having desires.
Jivas certainly have desires. And for that reason alone, there is a creation to let the desires be expressed. Just like the mind has a lot of, for example, impressions right now, and those impressions will be all expressed tonight, and then the whole world be created in the dream for those impressions to be expressed. So if, for example, suppose someone's highly attracted to painting, and then when they dream, what happens? Then they take on the role of a painter, and then they interface with painters, right? And then there's a whole world of painting. So in other words, the desire of the dream theme always reflects the theme of the mind. In that same way, the entire universe always reflects the entire theme, the collective desires of all jivas. So this is why I said last session that this universe is nothing but a reflection of the totality, the sum total of all of the jivas, whereby they can express their desires only to their ignorance, thinking that I am an individual who needs to fill myself up. The original question was, suppose I get moksha, implies that ajnanis are there and there's Brahman. Okay, so that I gave you answer 1. Answer 2 is, you can only ask that question from the standpoint of the dream, which is what I just mentioned. So in the dream, there's apparent duality, of course. It seems like there's differences, and there's the moon, there's the sky, there's the mountain, and it's so many things there. But the entire dream world only resolves into the one conscious being. So it's not like there's the dream objects and the conscious being. The entire material of the dream is made of the conscious being. All of the thoughts are made of the conscious being, of the one conscious being, right? All of the emotions and the stories and the love and the drama, everything is the one content, the one intelligence of that one conscious being. So upon waking, a dream of apparent duality, it resolves into what? None other than that one conscious waker. In other words, waker alone is in and through every object in the dream. But that waker alone remains even when the dream is no more. So again, what I'm bringing here is there's no such thing as two entities. It is only one being, through its power appears as the many. Question 2. If desire for moksha is innate, that means all beings will eventually discover it. However, this happens to bring the problem of a last jiva, a lonely person. You better find something to do. From the beginningless creation, the jiva count was finite, and on every moksha of jiva, the counter goes down. Doesn't this mean that the counter will reach 0 eventually, therefore the end of creation? It's a one jiva down, trillions more to go, okay. It says the jiva count was finite. No, jiva count is infinite. Now, of course, you're going to ask, how do you prove that, right? But I'll get there. So jiva count is infinite. So what is 1 minus infinity? Infinity still, right? So no matter how many jivas attain moksha, there is still an infinite amount of jivas dispensed throughout the universe, in all of the worlds. So the counter never goes down. It always remains infinite. This means that the creation for that reason cannot end, because the jivas cannot end. Now, the question is how to know that the creation will never end. Okay, tip. When did creation start? It didn't start. So what didn't start, can that end? No. Only what starts can end. What is beginningless cannot end, because it never started. Creation is beginningless, and it's not going to end. What is the one exception that can end, even though it's also beginningless? Ignorance. In other words, the removal of a notion which is false. For example, just suppose there's one lifetime now. Since when did you not know Hebrew? Well, since the beginning. Since the beginning of what? Since the beginning of this lifetime, right? So, and when do you discover Hebrew? Since I take my book, walk into a Hebrew class, and start removing my Hebrew language ignorance. So in that same way, the ignorance, beginningless, that is, of one's wholeness, since when was that? Just like Hebrew, not only since this life, but also from all of the previous lifetimes. Therefore, that knowledge alone can also be removed through knowledge. However, there's one exception. If you remove Hebrew ignorance, then what happens in the next lifetime? You get Hebrew ignorance again, right? So just like every lifetime, right? We've got to learn how to walk. We've got to do the basic stuff every single lifetime. So removal of ignorance of the nature of the self is the only exception whereby it no longer produces the jiva. I'll talk about why that is so. Now, I pose the question, how to know that the jiva count is infinite? Can someone give me some ideas on this question?
Brahman is infinite.
That's okay, sure. That's one way to explain it. Therefore, there's no such thing as finite in infinity. Good.
If the count wasn't infinite, then all jivas would already have attained moksha. There'd be no manifestation. The fact we're here.
Super. Okay, so Robert really got the logic right. So we said that creation has already existed for how long? Since infinite amount of years in the past. So what does that mean? That every jiva has already have gotten infinite amount of years to exhaust their karmas. And yet it hasn't happened. Here we are again. See, you could have asked the same question 25 trillion gazillion years ago. The answer would be the same. It doesn't matter. Because the universe was still beginningless. And if it was beginningless, it would have given everyone enough time to exhaust their karmas, which means the creation would have stopped by now. But it hasn't stopped by now, just as Robert said.
On the infinite, if there's finite amount of matter in the universe, in this current universe, and jivas are made of matter, so how can there be an infinite number?
A finite amount of matter. There's only as much matter as is needed for the objects in this creation. So I wouldn't say it's either infinite or finite. There's only as much as is needed because everything is in potential. What is potential? Infinite potential. If you need 20 million universes, that's how much matter you're going to get. Enough matter for 20 million universes.
So you said that ignorance can end. And then how I've understood it is that the only reason that there's a separation of like jivas and Brahman is because of ignorance. Therefore, if ignorance can end, doesn't that mean like creation can also end at some point? Like there's an end point?
Not the total creation. Good, Amrita. So it can end for the jnani, for the liberated being, by not being reborn, by not taking on another body. But it does not end for all of the other jivas. For example, how many enlightened beings have already died? Millions. And yet here we are, creation is still available for us because we still haven't done the job. Therefore, we still need creation for our own sake. Now, suppose we also all leave and not get reborn. Then there are still many more jivas, right? Who still need creation for their own exhaustion of many desires, playing with the worldly toys, as I call it.
So your own ignorance can end, but total ignorance never ends.
Exactly, which is why we still have a creation. In other words, if one person attained liberation in the past, then you and I will not be having this conversation because the job would have been done for every one of us. So this means for one being alone, they no longer have to bear another body. That was answer one that I gave you. Answer two is creation cannot go out of existence because creation or the jagat is an effect of a timeless cause. A timeless cause cannot have an effect that ends in time because the cause itself is timeless, which is why also we call creation lila or divine play. Nataraja? Here we have the snake coiled around Nataraja's neck 3 times. So Nataraja represents Ishwara, right? Shiva. Snake called 3 times. What does that mean? I am the truth of the past, present, and the future. And then we have Shiva, the Lord of Destruction, sitting on a little demon, a little demon dwarf, right? And this represents the Jiva's ahamkara. In other words, I have conquered by the help of my destructive power of self-knowledge, which destroys ignorance. I have helped the dwarf to be conquered, and therefore I am sitting on the ahamkara, the individuating principle who thinks I alone am in this universe. I have conquered that. And then we have holding a drum in his top right hand, and this drum is the represents the primal sound Aum, that is the of the universe. I probably heard this before, right? The Aum is a primal sound of the universe. I probably never asked why. What's the logic of that? Okay, so what is the subtlest element that embodies all of the things in the universe? Space. What is the property? What is inside space? Names and forms. What is the property of space? Sound. What is inside space? Names and forms. Right? So does the name contradict the form? No. In other words, wherever there is a form, there is a name. You cannot say this is a pot unless it is a pot. Every form has an inherent name. You understand it so far? Now, when I say Aum is the primal sound, that is the truth of all forms in creation, what does that mean? It means that, for example, if you take your tongue out right now, what are the only three sounds that you can say? Aum. Try that. Try to say any sound without moving your tongue. You can't even say E. You're going to say, what about E? You're still making your the back of the throat tighter by saying E. So only Aum, naturally alone, are the natural sounds in the universe. So what does this mean? A sound being the property of space, and what is inside space? Forms. And does a form contradict the name? No. Therefore, wherever there is a name, that's exactly where a form is. And what is a name except a combination of Aum? In other words, when you say a mountain, for example, all you're doing is you're saying Aum and you're moving your tongue and you're changing the inflection of this primordial sound of Aum. And therefore you're having the word Aum. Mountain. Just say mountain. You basically just said ow and then mountain, and then just move your tongue and therefore it sounds like mountain. So Aum is the sound of all forms, and forms do not contradict the names. And in order to say the name, you need the sound. In our Vedic literature, I'm not sure which part, it says that sound is actually, the name is actually more powerful than the form, because I cannot put a mountain in your mind, but I can say the word mountain. How did I do that? By using Aum and moving my tongue in such a way as to produce the word mountain. And what do? I automatically put the actual form mountain inside your mind, just by using what? Three sounds, Aum, and moving my tongue to make the word mountain. And then we've got a calm face, which represents a detached awareness, who is enjoying his cosmic intelligence, Sarvajna, which we talked about, Hiranyagarbha. And then we've got, see the legs? Remember Ganapati, how one of his legs is always down and one of his legs is up? Not two. Again, represents non-duality. And then we've got the ring of fire, which represents the universe, and fire represents the ongoing changes in the universe that are giving rise to new creation to take place. So Nataraja is a wonderful example of this lila, of this divine play, which is a result of Jiva's desires. Now, the lady further elaborate the difference between Ishwara and Brahman. I thought they were the same, just from a different standpoint. Ishwara is pure awareness, chit, reflected in Maya. When I say chit, I'm talking about Sat Chit Ananda. So what is Ishwara? Pure awareness, chit, which is nothing but Brahman, reflected in Maya. And this reflection is called Ishwara. Or the other name for it is Chidabhasa. I said this last week, reflected consciousness. So the formula goes like this. Brahman, which is awareness, conditioned by Maya's Triguna Shakti, equals Ishwara, equals God. So this means that Ishwara is not strictly Brahman, because Ishwara is reflected awareness and Brahman is original awareness, non-reflected awareness. So this means that Ishwara is still Mithya, because it depends upon Brahman, just like the ocean depends on the H2O. And this also should answer what Robert said last week. If Ishvara is mithya in respect to Brahman, yet we define Ishvara as all knowledge, all power, how can all knowledge, all power be defined mithya? Because all knowledge, all power still depends upon awareness. What is there to know about the intelligence unless there is a conscious being in whose presence the changes and the destruction and the universe is taking place? Now, I also want to add some specificity to 3 words. Remember when I drew up this diagram, I said Prakriti, and then we've got Maya, and we've got Karana Sharira. So I want to bring up the specificity between the words Maya, causal body, and avidya, because we put Maya and causal body in the same category. However, for general purposes, this is usually what you see in Vedanta. So I'm now bringing you one step a little bit more specific, a distinction between Maya and causal body. So this Prakriti, which is made up of 3 gunas, power of Brahman, when this Prakriti is predominantly sattva guna, then this Prakriti is called Maya. So what is Maya? Pure intelligence. What is Ishvara? Pure intelligence. All knowledge, all power. It is not contaminated by Rajaguna or Tamaguna. When this Prakriti is dominated by Tamaguna, then we call this Prakriti universe or Jagat. And when this Prakriti is dominated by Rajaguna, that means one of the 3 powers in it, then we call that Karana Sharira, causal body. We also call that avidya. The word avidya or ignorance is also associated to Karana Sharira in Vedanta. In fact, when we talk about the Karana Sharira in Vedanta, you will always see the word ignorance right next to it. Why is the causal body, Karana Sharira, equated to ignorance? What is the function of the causal body? To give birth to the subtle and the gross body. What does the subtle and the gross body presuppose? An individual. I am an individual. What does I am an individual presuppose? I am not the whole. What does I am not the whole presuppose? I do not know my full nature as the whole. I am ignorant. So what does this mean? Because I am ignorant, it gives a rise to my individuality. What gives rise to the individuality? My causal body. What is inside the causal body? My tendencies to think of myself as one distinct individual amongst the many. Therefore, ignorance is what gives rise to the subtle and the gross body, but also causal body is what gives rise to the subtle and the gross body. I am ignorant of my nature, therefore I get a subtle and a gross body. And what gives rise to the subtle and the gross body? The causal body. Therefore, ignorance and causal body are always hand in hand together in Vedanta. What does the word sharira mean? It means that which decays or withers away. So this means that even karana sharira, that which decays or withers away, can indeed decay or wither away. In other words, karana sharira that gives rise to the individual, that can also decay or wither away. How? By shifting my identity from the wanting individual, that means the individual who thinks is a separate being, who I need the world to fill me up, by shifting the I identity from that individual to the whole. And once having done so, there's no more subtle or the gross body necessary. Why? Why is the subtle or the gross body no longer necessary? Once I identify myself as the whole. Well, we can answer that by asking the question, why do you get a subtle and a gross body in the first place? To enjoy, to do things in the world, to get stuff, to fulfill your karmas, to exhaust stuff. So therefore, once the identity changes from the individual, the needy individual, the small individual, to the whole, then is there anything to gain in this world? No. So then who's there to come back? And for what purpose? So the only reason we come back to the world is why? To get stuff, to fall in love, to go through this, to succeed, to be someone, to go somewhere. Do you go to the places where you know there's nothing in it for you there? Where you know there's nothing to do there? Absolutely not. Why don't you go to those places? Because you know there's nothing to gain there. In that same way, where is their purpose of coming to the world, knowing that I am not only the world, but much more than the entire world? Where is the point of that? So this is the identity shift from the small individual who needs the world to the whole, in whom the world resides. Robert?
I think that relates to something Martin brought up last week when he said, can you, after having achieved moksha, come back out of sheer compassion for other beings? What he was really referring to there was the doctrine of the bodhisattvas, which is a belief in Mahayana Buddhism, as you would know. Those beings are entitled, according to that doctrine, to move to the final nirvana. But they delay that, so they're not actually fully liberated beings. They haven't achieved moksha. They take the bodhisattva vow to stay in manifestation until all sentient beings attain liberation, and then they'll attain theirs.
Yeah, I heard that, for the sake of compassion coming to guide the beings. And that is absolutely possible. If you would like that, I would not doubt that that is absolutely a possibility. You know, to come back to the next life with knowledge of some attraction of Sanskrit, get born in the right family, and the family brings you the right guru very early on, and you get educated, and then you start from that standpoint to educate others, and you have a really good life. No doubt that is possible.
But they haven't actually achieved moksha. They've deferred that state.
That is still love for the, that if it says utter devotion, if you think about it, right? Yeah. Because probably, okay, why? Probably if they attain moksha, then there's no coming back, right? But just by saying that fine line, just like right before that understanding, I want to serve the Lord. In fact, this is what bhakti is about, right? I heard somewhere that someone was asked, you know, so do you want to come back? It was one of the popular swamis. It was a bhakta. It was like Hare Krishna bhakta. And he says, absolutely. Why do you want to come back? So that I can chant the name of the Lord. Because when the bhaktas, they get into that mode of chanting, it's like just utter bliss. And if you're in that aura, you feel really good around them. Right? And it's really...
I've heard the saying,
yeah.
Rather than becoming the sugar, you still want to taste the sugar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know that saying?
Yeah.
It's like, rather than becoming the sugar, you still want to taste and just to enjoy the sugar.
Exactly. You know, so in other words, it's still a mind that wants to kind of taste the Lord. He doesn't want to be the Lord, he wants to taste it. So that's completely fine. And we really do honor, we honor bhaktas like that, because they really do help us to live our own inspiration for devotion to something much grander. Okay.
There is still that ignorance, isn't it, Andre? When you desire the love as outside you, or the Lord, it's still an ignorance there. It is
absolutely, that's 100% ignorance. That is no more or less ignorance than someone who's not doing that at all, and they're just having a normal in terms of, you know, just a dynamic life. But it's still willingly staying as a small individual, refusing to accept oneself as the whole. So there's a reason for that, and the reason is, of course, verse 7, we talk about the qualifications of the mind. So this means there's an aspect of the individual that is not willing to accept or to understand, because they find some pleasure, some enjoyment in staying a separate individual. Yeah. So you can always look at it both sides, right? You know, one of them is, it's a devotion and it's adorable. It helps a lot of people. But at the same time, you know, it's just lifetime after lifetime like that. I want to be a devotee. I want to be a devotee. I want to be a devotee. So eventually everyone comes to a point and they just say, okay, now time to learn the knowledge. And
is it possible to still be a devotee to God, but be realized as well, that everything is a whole, like the formless and the form and the formless God?
Absolutely.
At the same time.
Absolutely. However, you only get that chance in one lifetime. That means once that moksha is attained, there's only two possibilities from there on. One of them is to teach the knowledge, and the other is to further devote through just devote to your wife, devote to your husband, devote to your children, or you can just share the message to your friends and family and so on, or whoever's willing to listen. In other words, you only got two choices. One of them is to continue the tradition by demonstrating, showing the teachings. And the second is to really just live a life of freedom. That's the only two choices left for the person. So what Lorena is saying is, if you choose option number 2, then you can, be devotional. In fact, even number one is devotional. How can you not be devotional? Because you realize that you're only here because of all of the variables that came together, Ishwara Nugraha, that made you come to this place. And you had to meet different people. You had to read different books. You had to kind of, dive and, jump over the hoops, obstacles in order to discern what is worth listening to and what is not worth listening to. So many people contributed to your success. So why not worship? And how could you not worship Ishvara, that intelligence, because of which you are here today? Okay.
It's like gratitude.
And gratitude, absolutely. It's just a helpless gratitude because, you realize I've been here for beginningless lifetimes. How many, just think about the variables that had to come together to finally realize and not even miss, oh, I'm not going to come back anymore. Oh, I miss the world. Just to come to that maturity of knowing that this world is in me alone. There's nothing missing in me. I alone am full. When a person says I alone am full, it's referring to that understanding. It's not referring to the individual 5 koshas. So this prakriti, which is made of these 3 gunas, is endowed with awareness, with kshetrajna. This is why the jiva knows both about knowledge, which is sattva guna, but also knows about ignorance, which is tamaguna. So in other words, tamaguna nor sattva guna, they cannot cloud awareness. And what is this awareness? In fact, you are a living proof of this awareness. You know about the fact that you know stuff, but you also know about the fact that you don't know stuff. So this means you are not clouded by tamaguna, nor clouded by knowledge. That means you are free from knowledge, free from ignorance. Just the fact that you say, I don't know. So the fact that you say, I don't know means what? The jiva is both the kshetrajna, but also the kshetram, the knower and the known. Dissolution, talk about that. How does the big crunch happen? Okay, so at the time of creation, there's an order. It's not like there's an actual order, but we give it in order so the mind can quantify it. And this order goes from the subtlest of the subtlest elements to the grosser elements: space, air, fire, water, earth. So let's say, for example, creation of a star or a planet. How does this happen? So let me show you an order. Take space. So in space, in the subtlest element, what happens? A rotating clump of gas come together. How? Through the law of gravity. Remember the grand force that I explained last week, which consists of 4 forces: gravity, electromagnetism, strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force. Helium and hydrogen, they come together by the force of gravity. So gravity pulls them together into an interstellar cloud. So what is that? Air. Now, when I say air, I'm not talking about oxygen. I'm talking about something that is less subtle than space. So it's going towards more solid now. So now this gravity pulls these atoms together tighter and tighter. By the force of gravity, what happens? The core starts to heat up. What is that? Fire. Heat. As the core starts to heat up and more atoms start to clump together, what happens? It starts to turn into a more denser and denser body called either a star or a earth. Therefore, you're now going to water and then finally to earth. So what am I showing you this? To demonstrate the order: space, interstellar cloud, air, fire, that means heat, and then water, earth, and then finally you got the whole planet. Now, the question is, that's the order from creation. Now, how does dissolution, pralayam, or means dissolution, or brahmaji, night, or what's called a big crunch in science, how does that happen? The order is exactly reversed. First of all, humans go extinct. This is not a surprise. We've already had many extinct times before. We weren't always here on this planet. So obviously something happens, some incident, and then the core gets unstable. This is all. We can also observe this when there's an explosion of a star. And then eventually the planet starts to turn back into this interstellar cloud of hydrogen and nitrogen atoms. And then that also dissolves slowly. And then you have pure space. Not space like now, because if you look at space now, there's still that hydrogen and nitrogen in there. So pure space, and that space also starts to then dissolve into pure nothingness. So space is the last remaining component before this universe goes out of existence into potential. And this potential we call Maya. Is Hiranyagarbha's Sarvajna in potential similar to Sarvajna in potential in the causal body? The word potential cannot be equated to causal body, because I just explained what is causal body. Causal body is not potential. Causal body is ignorance. You can, however, equate the word potential to Maya, because it is sattva guna. In other words, sarvajna is Maya, all knowledge. What is sarvajna? All knowledge. Sarvajna from the standpoint of the unmanifest, that means all knowledge from the standpoint of the unmanifest universe. There's no universe now. We call that Maya. Sarvajna from the standpoint of the manifest universe, as we're experiencing now, is called Hiranyagarbha. So what is Hiranyagarbha? It is Ishvara identified with all of the subtle bodies of all of Jivas in all of the worlds, but also identified with its own sarvajna of everything else, of the laws like dharma and gravity, electromagnetism, everything. The teaching distinction between the knower, you, and the known, everything other than you. And I want to really bring this down to a little bit more of an understandable, relatable level. This is kshetram, right? This is everything that is known. So what is exactly is known? For example, your 5 koshas, or the 3 bodies, or the universe. And when I say 5 koshas, that includes, your emotions, what you know, right? Your memories, everything. So this is all kshetram. And even when you say, I know about myself. Suppose you say right now, I know about myself. I know that I exist. Suppose you say that right now. So my question will be to you, what knows the fact that you just said, I know that I exist? What knows that? And that which knows is called the kshetrajna. Suppose right now you say, I am Brahman, I am consciousness, I am awareness. So what you just said was everything belonging to this category right here. You said, I am awareness. The awareness, am I, all of that is known to you. The entire experience of making a claim of who you are, of claiming your nature, from beginning to the end, all of that was known. By what? By kshetrajna. Another name is Atma. And this Atma, if you could verbalize it, it would be, I know that I am. So what do we usually say? I am. But there's a silent presence. I know that, and you cannot verbalize that presence. I know that I am. And that silence witness, that silent presence is kshetrajna. And what is this kshetrajna or Atma? It is a non-participating, so it doesn't participate in your transactions. It doesn't participate in your thoughts. Because if it did, you could not think whatever you think. It would be interfered with. It is non-interfering. It is unchanging. It is non-verbalized. You cannot verbalize the fact that you always know stuff. Because if you do verbalize it, you would say, I know that I know. But there's still a silent presence because of which you said all that. It is a non-verbalized principle of knowledge that illumines every thought and every experience. Now, even if you said, what is this presence? I don't understand what it is. Everything you just said belongs right here. I do not know, including the ahamkara. I do not know what it is. But you knew about the entire experience from beginning to end because of you, kshetrajna. And we also call this kshetrajna the sakshi in Sanskrit, which means the witness knower, the observer, the one that lends its shine onto what? Onto the entire experience from beginning to end, all the time, including the 3 states. Waking, dreaming, sleep, including the 3 times, past, present, and future, always illumining everything. So you can put 3 states here, you can put 3 past, present, and future also. Imagine there's a sun here, and this sun equals kshetrajna, right? And this sun is shining on, let's say, phase A, phase B, phase C, phase D, E, F, G, right? So all of these phases are kshetrajna. Everyone's going to say, I am Andre, I am Victor, I am Nagesh, I am Meena, I am David, I am Goknur, right? Everyone's going to say that. And everyone is saying that why? Because of this one kshetrajna that is in and through every single individual. The knower of Andre is the same knower of Robert. The knower of Amrita is the same knower of Buddha. Only one knower, illumining the experience of Kshetram, called the person. And then what is each one of these? We can call them the individual knower. So everyone is an individual knower, because consciousness, Kshetrajna, is the non-participating, non-interfering, unchanging, non-verbalized principle of knowledge, is shining onto Goknur's mind, Olga's mind, Amrita's mind, David's mind, everyone's mind. And for that reason, we are never not known to ourselves as self-evident. So on the bottom, we can see the 5 elements. So this is the manifest universe. In other words, the universe that is made of the 5 elements. So everything you touch, see, smell, taste, all of that is a composition or the mixture of one of these 5 elements. So suppose this triangle is, okay, it's the mind. So we'll say someone's mind here, right? So what's happening? Constantly, the world of 5 elements, the material, is entering it's a stimuli, and it's being entered through one of those jnana indriyani. That means through the ears, through the skin, eyes, tongue, and nose. So if you take away the nose, right, you would still have all of these present in the world, but the nose could no longer pick up. So in other words, then earth would still be there, but you could not pick up that, that scent. So in other words, you would have a world minus smell. Okay. So now, after it's entered one of your jnana indriyanis, where does it go? It goes into the prana. In other words, it's carried by the prana into your subtle body, into your mind. So where does it go? Remember how I spoke about it goes into your screen of your mind? So it has to come somewhere. It has to replicate the objects of the world. So if there's a ball over there, it has to be replicated in my mind. So right now, you're seeing in the screen of the mind this actual poster, right? Now, this subtle body consists of the mind, the intellect, the ahamkara, and also the chitta. Chitta should be here, which means memory. Now, memory consists of 2 kinds of memories. The first is your unconscious memory. I'm sure you heard this before in psychology, right? Unconscious memory. What is unconscious memory? It is the memory which we collect since childhood. That means those impressions which have been indoctrinated through parents, through society, through religion. And there are those very early childhood memories that have been shown to us, which we don't remember. And by the presence of these memories, what does it do? It dictates how we assess situations. It dictates how we have an opinion about certain people or a certain object in this world. In other words, our prejudices, our personal subjective view of the world gets interpreted in the light of chitta, unconscious memory, which has begun since birth in this lifetime. The second type of chitta memory is what we call samskaras. In other words, memories which come from the past life. And where do these memories come from? These samskaras or vasanas, they come from the causal body. So sometimes we have a certain, for example, we feel close to a certain tradition. We feel close to a certain group or community. Why? Because there's a strong imprint, a strong samskara coming from the causal body, which is manifesting in the chitta as a subtle memory. So we don't quite say, oh, I remember having chanted Bhagavad Gita in my previous lifetime. You don't say that, do you? But it is still a memory. So how do you relate to that memory? Unlike the unconscious memory, we say, oh, I remember having gone through this negative experience of, kind of seeing something that didn't really have a good taste in my life. You have a unexplained relation to that particular object. And that unexplained relation is what we call a samskara manifesting from the previous life in the form of your unconscious memory. So now the 5 elements have entered your screen of your mind. The mind is now also going to use the chitta to ask, what does this mean? What does this object mean? Can I relate to this object of the past? So this is where the memory helps, right? In other words, when you see something, then your memory takes that from the past, so it doesn't have to reassess is this dangerous? Is this worth my time? It just uses the past, and it quickly assesses, okay, so on the basis of the past, the unconscious memory, including the unconscious, the causal body, I'm going to go and say yes to this. So that also memory goes onto the screen of the mind mixed. That means defining the experience of the world. So now the world has been defined through the memory so far. What else does this experience, the screen of the mind, get defined by? It gets defined by your intellect. So now on the screen of the mind is an object in this world consisting of the 5 elements. Also, it now has to ask the intellect, what do I do with this object in the situation that this person finds themselves in? Now the intellect would take that data in the screen of the mind, and you will look at some variables in the light of Dharma, because you also have to, where's Dharma shining onto the intellect? So it would say, okay, so you have to now help this person because they're asking for help, and it is right to help. Therefore, that is one of the things that you should do. So that data gets added onto the screen of the mind also. And now that experience has to be owned by one single individual. You can't just kind of, offload it to some random individual. You, the one that's perceiving through the 5 senses, have to own the experience in the subtle body belonging to one individual. And that is done through the ahamkara. Then the ahamkara says, it doesn't say, just in the presence of the ahamkara, this experience in the mind is isolated, localized to one single individual, which we call our names. So now this experience is now further modified, as I said, by your vasanas. So suppose you have a vasana. What is a vasana? A habit, a tendency to think about a certain thing, a impression from the past, which causes me to color in. That's what vasana literally means in Sanskrit. That which colors, to color in the total experience in the subtle body, therefore modifying the interpretation of the intellect and the manas. So even if your manas, even if your unconscious memory and your intellect has assessed a situation, the final product of that will still be colored by the vasanas. So in other words, suppose you see someone that reminds you of someone, right? And that reminding is called a vasana. And that vasana will then say, no, I should not help this person. So your intellect says, I should help this person because that's dharma. But then your vasana overrides that and it says you should not help it. And then what happens? Because the intellect is always being shun on by the law of dharma, then there is a feeling of guilt. Now this guilt gets added onto the manas, also gets added onto the screen of the mind, owned by the ahamkara. And then the final experience, what do? Through your speech, you say, no, I don't want to help you. Through your hands, you give them a finger or something, right? In other words, you give them some gesture that represents the intention which has been formulated in the subtle body through the processes which I explained. And then finally, all of your responses then go back into the world in the form of these 5 elements. Okay. And what else can we share? So where did these karmas and these vasanas come from? They came from the causal body. We explain what's the causal body. When Prakriti is dominant by the Rajaguna, we call that causal body. And then we've got the Kshetrajna. In other words, the Kshetrajna is in and through all of this for every person. That's why whatever is going on here, whatever sensation is going on in the body, made up of 5 elements, it is being awared, it is being illumined, shunned on by this one conscious principle called Atma or Kshetrajna.
The color coding of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas.
Good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good, you noticed that. So we will see that the intellect is predominantly sattvic. So this is why we say the only place where the knowledge of the self, Kshetrajna, can be directly discerned is in the intellect, because it is a pure mirror, a mirror that reflects the original consciousness onto the sattva guna. And then we can see that the ahamkara is dominant by the tamaguna, and then the manas, which is the mind, which is often associated to emotions. What are emotions? A lot of movement, a lot of energy. What is rajaguna? That which is energetic, that which is alive, the energy, the power. Therefore, the manas is predominant by the rajaguna. That's why emotional people, for the most part, are very active, are very kind of like loud, right? Very out there, very alive, because rajaguna is very alive, very colorful energy. And also these three colors, it just represents that the entire creation is just a mixture, a combination of permutations of these three gunas. So the other question is, what dictates the difference between one causal body and another causal body? In other words, causal body for me versus causal body for you. Because what is the ultimate cause of everything? The three gunas. So by the combination, the infinite combination of these three gunas, it produces the qualities of the causal body for every single individual. So therefore, what's the difference between my personality and your personality? The permutations and combination, the mixture, the quantity mixtures of certain qualities of these gunas. Now, what the scriptures say is they say your goal as a sadhaka is to move towards sattva guna, because this is the energy of clarity. There's no clarity in a person that's still active. I mean, there is a clarity, but in the form of what can I get from this world? What can I kind of, for myself? So it's only when a person goes from, in fact, the whole spiritual journey is to go from tamaguna, the state of inertia, laziness, not willing to do many things, not willing to clean the garden or clean the house or get out the door, right? Into a more rajasic state. So this is where we prescribe karma yoga, right? In other words, go and do something that inspires you, something that kind of jolts you up. So you can't tell a lazy person, like you're lazy, maybe a child or something, right? Go and read Bhagavad Gita, because they still have to go through the process of first developing that Raja Guna. You still need to be active to sit down and concentrate. That needs a Raja Guna disposition. And then Raja Guna, suddenly, the person still an erratic mind, still very active. Then the person starts to slowly through the sadhana, contemplate and reflect upon life and existential matters. And that's where we move towards sattva guna. So a lot of thinkers, a lot of philosophers in this world at all times are predominantly sattva guna. That's where all knowledge takes place. In the Raja Guna, this is where most active like Silicon Valley types and you want to achieve stuff and be out there and be seen. And Tamaguna is also required for sleep. If you don't have that sense of inertia, if you drink a lot of coffee, what does coffee do? Lifts up your Raja Guna, impossible to sleep. Therefore, Tamaguna is also necessary in certain situations because it is a stabilizing energy. It's that solid energy that puts the person down. It doesn't kind of not moving so many places. Yeah. So the goal is purify the mind. By the purification of the mind, person gets more calm, more peaceful, and that is called sattva guna.
What are these two Om?
Okay, so this is showing us that the Jiva is a mixture of Kshetram, the black, and Kshetranya. Kshetranya represents the yellow. In other words, in this case, awareness. In other words, awareness shining in and through all of this. So it's revealing that, yes, don't forget, you are the Om. You are the light, illumining light.
Thing with the gunas, I think, although we say time is finite, and these three stages you're trying to achieve the sattvic stage at the top, but it's sort of like a rite of passage for younger people. They start off a bit. I'm just thinking about my sons. They start off a bit lazy, trying to talk about spiritual things. They're kind of like, whatever, mum,
Yeah.
And then to get motivated, you're more rajas, getting out there. You start to go from being tamasic to, I want to achieve things in my life and get money because they think that's going to get a bigger house, more property, more successful. Their idea of success is completely different to someone that's sattvic and they're trying to get spiritual success, like achieve moksha or
Excellent point.
Yeah.
In fact, this is exactly the process that we say, you need to talk to the individual at their level, at their language.
Yeah.
Right? It's so easy to say, no, this is all, passing and it's all fleeting. We first need to see the person. So the responsibility of a sattvic person is to take care of the rest of those who are still dominated mainly by these other gunas, which is keeping that knowledge in a state of partiality. Yeah, but generally we need to be very careful and nurturing by telling the person, yes, what do you like? And then we usually tell them, what is it that you want for yourself, right? Get a little bit kind of selfish. That's one step better than being totally lazy. And then they say, well, I want to achieve money. Okay, cool. Then, go and explore that. Yeah. So it's a very gradual, nurturing process, careful process that we need to.
There'd only be a few like Adi Shankara. He's like a child genius that just understands everything at age of 5 or whatever. So
yeah,
you know, there's not that many that are like.
Yeah, that would be cool, right? At age 5, you know, all this.
Yeah, crazy, and walking around India at the age of 12 or whatever. But
there's
not many. There's not many that would be.
That's a good point. In the earlier times, right? Even like when I was born, in Serbia, kids like 12, more mature than today's 4-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
And this is how it is. So I'm not surprised if at that time you would have kids at 12 who were already way more mature in terms of their perception of the world and their devotion for the divinity.
Do you think that comes with hardship too? Because my mother was working at age 14, and she grew up in a harder time.
Definitely agree. Hardship really kind of solidifies you, makes you concrete and real. Yeah. If you're just kind of like giving them everything on a silver platter, then it's like spoiled children. Yeah. Entitlements, right? I'm entitled. Amaditwam adambhitwam ahimsa kshantir arjavam acharyo pasanam shaucham stairyam atma vinigraha.
20 values of an enlightened mind. In response to Arjuna's question, what is jnana? The values necessary to prepare the mind for knowledge are set out in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter
13.
Of the Gita begins with Arjuna asking Lord Krishna to teach him. In some Gita manuscripts, this opening verse is not found. Arjuna said, "O Lord, I would like to learn about Prakriti, insentient matter, and Purusha, sentient person, Kshetra, the field, which indicates the body, Kshetranya, the knower who is conscious of the field, the body, knowledge, and that which is to be known." In answer to a part of the request, Lord Krishna enumerates 20 qualities of the mind, which he terms jnana, or knowledge.
These are 20 values now.
1, absence of conceit. 2, absence of pretense. 3, not hurting. 4, glad acceptance. 5, rectitude. 6, service to the teacher. 7, inner and outer purity. 8, steadfastness. 9, mastery over the mind. 10, dispassion towards sense objects. 11, absence of self-importance. 12, reflection on the limitations of birth, death, old age, sickness, and pain. 13, absence of a sense of ownership. 14, absence of obsession to son, wife, house, and so on. 15, constant equanimity towards desirable and undesirable results. 16, unswerving devotion to me, characterized by non-separateness from me. 17, preference for a secluded place. 18, absence of craving for social interaction. 19, understanding the ultimate validity of self-knowledge. 20, commitment to self-knowledge. These are declared to be knowledge, and what is opposed to it is ignorance. As we have seen, knowledge, as used here, does not mean knowledge of the self, but stands for those qualities that prepare the mind for the knowledge of the self. Knowledge of the self in this verse is indicated by jnana, which is to be known. Jnana indicates those qualities of the mind that must be present for the vastu, the truth, to be known. The truth is that which is the ultimate reality to be known, that which cannot be resolved into anything else. We have seen in the previous discussion that for values to be personally valuable, they must be discovered through knowledge and not forced upon a person. Therefore, the term jnana is quite appropriate. The list of values constituting jnana is long, but the qualities are interrelated. They define a harmonious frame of mind in which knowledge can occur. Each of the terms used by Lord Krishna highlights a certain attitude, the value for which must be discovered personally in order that the attitude becomes a natural aspect of the seeker's mind.
Does anyone want to share what you got out of this? What we are to embark on?
Value of values.
Value of values, yeah, is the whole book by Dayananda. So chapter 13 consists of 3 categories. Category 1 is Prakriti and Kshetram, which means the material universe. Category 2 is Purushaha, Kshetrajna, and Jnana. This is the conscious principle. Category 3 is Jnanam. These are the 20 values which are going to help us to fertilize the soil of the mind, not in your garden. By fertilizing the soil, then the seeds of self-knowledge, which we are planting, can fructify much faster and much firmer, much deeper into our being, into our understanding. That means we get to embody the knowledge in a more harmonious, holistic way. So far, Krishna has spoken about Kshetrajna and Kshetram. We have undertaken that from verse 1 to verse 6. Now, Krishna will undertake the word Jnanam, and this will be between verse 7 to 11. So next time you see a shop 7-Eleven, you always think of these 20 values. What is Shabda Pramana? When we say Shabda Pramana, we're talking about the means of knowledge which brings direct knowledge of the knowledge of the self. That is Shabda Pramana. If I were to describe to you what a durian tastes like, if I were to use my words, that means if I were to use Shabda Pramana to describe what a durian tastes like, would you have a direct experience of a durian? No. Why not? Because the durian, the taster and the tasted are different to begin with. By the way, does someone know what durian smells like and tastes like?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
good. It's a good weapon, right? You know, so the taster and the tasted are different. Therefore, no amount of Shabda Pramana can help to reveal the direct taste of an object which is not inherently the taster. However, this does not apply when it comes to the subject, to the taster, to the one that is true and present to him or herself all the time. Why? Because the person that is present is always present. Therefore, there's no question of Shabda Pramana failing. Shabda Pramana, means of knowledge, only is there to help the person clarify what is the nature of my constant existence. It's not like the person now has to go and get existence and says, oh, you know, hold on, let me go first find myself, and then you can kind of like talk. You don't have to go and find yourself. You're always present to yourself. For that reason alone, Shabda Pramana works, because it is talking about that which is already true, which is yourself. Suppose that even if the Shabda Pramana is provided, which is meant to reveal the nature of the self with total clarity, without any doubts, suppose it fails. I just explained why it succeeds, right? Because you're always true to yourself. Therefore, I'm simply using words to reveal that which is true, which is yourself. Suppose that fails. There's only 2 reasons. It cannot be because you are missing, because you're listening to the words, right? So you're present. There's only 2 reasons. One, the teacher is not explaining the knowledge properly. They're not communicating in the way that is meant to be communicated according to the tradition. That is one reason. The second reason is, suppose that the teacher is explaining it properly, but the person still doesn't get it. What's the only other issue that's left. The person, the mind, doesn't get it. Who's listening? The mind. Therefore, the issue has to be then the mind. So, Shabda Pramana, firstly, the means of knowledge meant to reveal the truth, absolutely has power to do so, because you're always true to yourself. And we're simply peeling off those notions which says I'm an individual. I need the world for my fullness. We're simply peeling off those notions. Now, how exactly does this Shabda Pramana work? Creating a context for certain words, like in infinite or Brahman. But we also remove your subjective interpretations, because what happens is when a person hears I am Brahman, what's the mind going to do? It's going to visualize, okay, so now I've added a new identity onto this existing individual person, right? So the person puts themselves above the world. So how does Shabda Pramana work? By removing the possible subjective interpretations that the mind loves to create, only to its unconscious mind, as I explained in the chart, but also its samskaras. In other words, it always wants to color in everything that the teacher is saying, and therefore it doesn't get the knowledge. Shabda Pramana removes those possible interpretations that the mind, which is listening, may create. So why did I just share this to you? Because where are we now? We are in talking about values. And now you're saying, okay, well, this knowledge is working, but I want it to work even more. So I just answered, why is it not working as much as you would want? Because the mind, that even though it got it, it still needs a few more qualifications. That if gained, then this knowledge would take a much firmer, deeper root. And we've already explained, the Shabda Pramana is there, it works. So therefore, the only other option is an unqualified mind. And what are we now doing? We are qualifying that mind so that it can pull this knowledge even deeper into its being. What is the consequence of an unqualified mind, of an unprepared mind?
Distracted by other thoughts.
Distracted by other thoughts, absolutely.
I think living with contradiction.
So it's going to not able to resolve its own notion in light of what it's just heard.
Misunderstandings.
So misinterpretation is going to color it in with what it wants to hear and not what is actually being said.
It fails due to ignorance.
It fails. In other words, it doesn't succeed at grasping the fullness of what is really being expounded. It rather takes it into a partial understanding. What else is the result or the consequence of an unprepared mind?
Agitation.
Agitation, good, because it is not willing to compromise its own ideas. It finds comfort zone in its own ideas. Therefore, when someone starts to speak about a different possibility, then the person's kind of like, oh, I'm agitated. And then what happens? I project it onto the teacher. I project it onto that one who is expounding this new idea. This is very common.
Another consequence is it misleads others.
Brilliant, good, because it innocently doesn't know. In other words, I don't know what I don't know. Therefore, all I know is what I know. And that to me is good as knowledge.
It creates an accumulation of ignorance again.
It perpetuates its existing notion. It's kind of like it listens to a truth and it reinterprets that truth to support its own pre-existing notion, what it wants to hear. Therefore, it just helps it to build itself, its own bubble even bigger. And that bubble then gets further spread to others because you're convinced, oh, wow, this is right. What's the consequence? The first one is accepting, for example, what sounds good and rejecting what doesn't sound good, as we already said, because it doesn't support my pre-existing belief. The second one, which Nagesh said, was misinterpretation of input. So whether that input is self-knowledge or whether that input is values of life, it still misinterprets that in its own favor. In other words, it doesn't account the whole, but its whole is as good as my own little whole, my own little bubble. Suppose that, parents or a close associate they're abusive. And then the person, the child or the friend convinces themselves, they say, I deserve it. I deserve this. I did something wrong. So in other words, they start to justify because they have some relationship with this person. And then they kind of build this narrative why it's okay to be abused. So this is misinterpretation of ahimsa, non-injury. Why did no one help Draupadi when she was being disrobed? Why did everyone all the wise ones, and Yudhishthira, the 4 Pandavas, Bhishma, why did no one act and help Draupadi? This is a classic example of misinterpreting values and therefore being stuck. So what am I showing you now? When a value gets misinterpreted, what's the consequence of that? It is a direct impact on our environment, and it causes lots of grief and conflict. So Bhishma didn't act because he thought, or he interpreted the situation as Yudhishthira's problem. The four Pandavas didn't act because they thought that the authority of the older brother, Yudhishthira, was more important. Therefore, they didn't act. So in both cases, what are we doing? We're taking this non-injury and we are totally changing the interpretation of it. And then we justify to feel good about it. The Mahabharata, the story, it's not about, for example, as we often interpret, Yudhishthira is the one that does it all right, and Dhritarashtra or the Duryodhana is the one that does it all wrong. That's not what Mahabharata story is showing. It's showing that every side, both the educated side and the uneducated side, are making mistakes. And those mistakes need to be corrected. Otherwise, they just keep on persisting, causing inappropriate responses in the world, and therefore causing lots of suffering for our environment. So this is the topic that I would like to carry on next week. As you can see now, we're going a little bit more into kind of down to earth and how to live as a integrated, holistic human being, because this directly represents your maturity in terms of how well we understand self-knowledge. There's a direct correlation there. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May all be happy, may all be free from illness, may all behold good things, and may no one suffer. Peace.